I think the biggest unlock was that reps stopped guessing who to call. Like with 7,000 companies, who you call is like one of the most important decisions. We had reps prospecting in companies that were already aware of them, something that we map out as part of this ABM program. And they booked like 4 meetings in the first day of just by starting their day with companies that were already aware of them. 25% of their pipeline now comes from either a company that we sourced net new as part of the ABM program or a signal that came as part of the ABM program. So, I mean, you can set up this infrastructure, plug it into your already winning motion just because you're discovering new signals or companies.
You know, there's this narrative out there, AI is going to take all of our jobs. Once you start using these tools, like you get into code, you get into co-work, you realize how much like you still need to be guiding it. And especially like your expertise on whatever the subject is.
The one tool I really thought was going to change the game was Clay. The next time I had that feeling was with Claude Code, and I haven't had that feeling with any other tech since.
Welcome back to the show. Today's guests are the founders of Workflows.io, which combines AI workflows with human expertise to implement end-to-end growth systems. They are ABM experts, marketing masters, and they're here to tell you exactly how to boost revenue in 2026. Please welcome the founders of Workflows.io, Fivos and Dan. Guys, welcome to the show. Thank you for joining.
Thank you, Pete. Maybe we start with a small intro. Dan and I met we were working for another company together, an outbound agency. We work with more than 200 companies for their outbound motion, and we launched Workflows in July 2025. We focus on 4 main service lines, which is content, outbound, RevOps, and ABM, which is what we're going to be talking about. We're using our own services to scale, and that's why we're 20 people now, full-time after 9 months, completely bootstrapped, as Adam likes. Thanks to content, mainly, because we drove more than 8 million impressions in the last 8 months. And then with proper ABM, we did all the retargeting. And it's one of our favorite services that we like to implement typically for B2B SaaS companies. Typically, they're around Series A, Series B. And this is what we're going to be breaking down today. But before we do, I'm just going to give it to my co-founder, Dan, to intro himself.
Yeah, so just a bit of background on myself. I actually started in sales as a full cycle AE, where I became obsessed with solving the issues that I was struggling with most when I was in AE. And so when we launched Workflows.io, our ultimate goal was to build so much internal tech and processes around software that we know are great, so that our service is more like a service as a software, AI native service, whatever you want to call it. Because we believe that's how we can get the most value, not just by relying on tools or tech or AI, and not just relying on human input, but combining them in a really unique way. So that's ultimately the goal of Workflows. And yeah, we've tested 300 plus tools collectively between me and Fivos. And so we've learned a lot of how to get the most out of tech like Clay and our B2B. So yeah, excited to dive into how this plays into ABM and how we think every company should approach ABM in 2026.
Heck yeah. I read a book, probably like 8 years ago now. It was called B2B is ABM. It was basically a pitch for Terminus. I realized by the end of the book, which happens sometimes when you read business books, you get to the end and you realize they're just trying to pitch their software. But, you know, I think the ABM, which for folks that don't know, stands for account-based marketing. It is this motion of, it's basically the complete antonym of spray and pray, high volume marketing, one size fits all messages, and getting very precise on who you're targeting, what you're targeting them with. Back in the day, and this makes me seem old, but back in the day is really like 6 years ago. A lot of the ABM narrative was around, spending $100,000 to land a $1 million client, but taking 2 years to do so. And, we've been, I think, all very impressed and amazed by all the tools that have come out over the past few years to really just like parse things, run workflows, run automations, use, actual AI. And it's been a pretty amazing thing. So I guess to start, I feel like with that setup, a lot of founders and a lot of marketers still hear ABM and they think about like sending gift boxes to CEOs or like booking flights, just these very high, expensive, high energy activities in order to build this long-term relationship with a prospect, and eventually, closing them. So I'm curious, kind of in today's lens, how do you sort of think about or define, I guess, like ABM infrastructure versus running sort of more like one-off campaigns? Like, what is that? How do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, I'm happy to call out the name. I think ABM was largely popularized by companies like 6sense, which were very expensive, and so they gave this, amazing pitch of like ABM being a strategy that you should implement. But then, as you said, 6sense was often pitched as the solution to that, which for a lot of smaller companies who can't afford it, like that's not necessarily the best way to make use of the strategy. And I think that there's nothing wrong with like traditional ABM software, but I think with all the new tools that have come out, as you said, there's new ways to do it. And, in our opinion, better ways to do it that oftentimes end up with a lesser cost. And so I think what we're left with is a concept of ABM that's a little bit misunderstood. People still carry like the baggage from that enterprise software era where people were pushing as a way to sell enterprise software, kind of like how HubSpot pushed the inbound idea. And so our view of what ABM is if you have a limited TAM or you have a huge TAM, but there's a high value segment in that TAM that can get outsized value from what you provide, then you essentially need an account-based approach. If you're lovable and you could sell to hundreds of thousands of companies, you have a very different strategy than if you're a vertical SaaS and there are 10,000 great companies in your TAM. Well, it's like you're playing a very different game. Now, all of your marketing activities pretty much have to converge at those 10,000 companies or you're kind of wasting your time. And so you kind of need from the ground up to build your approach around that. So that means like multi-threading it to every account, being hyper-targeted, running the same ads to the same list that you're running outbound to, breaking into account from every angle. And of course, gifting plays into that, but that's not necessarily like, that's more the demand gen strategy rather than ABM is like an infrastructure piece. And so I don't believe ABM is a piece of software. It's a strategy you can execute with many different software tools like Clay, but also like Common Room, Seam. You could potentially do it just in HubSpot. It's really just a strategy. And so I think we're a part of the camp that's trying to reinvent ABM. We have Kyle Poyar, who we respect a lot. He's calling it ABX just to try and rebrand it. Some people are calling it account-based GTM now. But it's all the same idea, going top down from the account, being hyper-targeted across all your marketing activities. And so what we're teaching today is not necessarily like how to replicate 6sense and Clay. I mean, in some ways it is what we're going to show, but it's more about how to be smarter and account-based in the way that you do your GTM. And so it's a strategy that is in some ways tool agnostic.
And I'm glad you sort of framed it that way. I think, the world of marketing, especially the speed at which new tools are coming out, it's very easy for us as marketers or founders to like try to bucket these things into very like, okay, I'm going to be ABM or I'm going to be, whatever the antithesis to that is. And it's like really what we're trying to do with this, showing this idea of ABM. And obviously we're going to get really deep into it in just a second, but like, it's an approach and it's a way of thinking about things and a way of setting up your playbook. And I always say the playbook that your winning playbook is going to be the one that you write yourself. And, in the lens of ABM, I think there's a lot to sort of write and coordinate in terms of like you said, identifying that sort of higher tier client, or maybe that's all of your clients, depending on your audience. And yeah, so let's, for the audience, let's not worry too much about, bucketing things and more about like what tactics that we're about to see can we implement that sort of ring true to the audience and the product that we're trying to bring out to market. So I think it's just so easy to get caught up in, I don't know, now everyone's talking about AEO, GEO. We can't even agree on an acronym, but like AI SEO, for lack of a better term. So we kind of dance around these different subjects, but I think this is definitely like more from a higher level strategic lens, this idea of ABM. So let's dive into it. I think you had a couple things to share. Is that fair to say? And we can kind of dive into like how you think about, let's say, I'm a new client for workflows or RB2B is, and kind of talk about like how you guys think about it, and how you sort of line these things out to execute.
For sure. I mean, Fivos, why don't you share a screen just before we get into the process? I also want to, it's important to sometimes start with the punchline, like why should people care and how much of a difference can this make? I'll give it an example. So, I mean, we've been running ABM programs as a core service from our business from the start. And so we've been doing it for like Series A companies. We've got some like proper enterprises doing it now. But I think like one example that always stands out, we had this Series A company that was extremely effective at selling into what they thought was their TAM, which they thought was 3,500 companies, but they were selling giant six-figure contracts, like huge contracts. And so they were still a decently sized company, and they had like a winning GTM motion. But with 3,500 companies in their CRM in a really complicated traditional industry to map out, which is often the case for these, SaaS companies. Not every SaaS company sells to other SaaS companies. A lot of SaaS companies sell to traditional businesses, which if you're using like a typical database, you might not even be able to like find all these companies. So we basically did a very in-depth TAM map. We doubled their TAM from 3,500 to 7,000. So if you can imagine, that's like discovering 2x of your market that these didn't have on your radar before. We did the whole process that we'll go through now, but like small changes that actually had a massive effect on their GTM. Their connect rates went from 3 to 4% to 6 to 7% because we were validating their phone numbers at scale and finding them and loading them directly to the CRM. And we did some other things to optimize that. But I think the biggest unlock was that reps stopped guessing who to call. Like with 7,000 companies, who you call is like one of the most important decisions. We had reps prospecting in companies that were already aware of them, something that we map out as part of this ABM program. And they booked like 4 meetings in the first day of just by starting their day with companies that were already aware of them. And as it stands, since we implemented the program for them, 25% of their pipeline now comes from either a company that we sourced net new as part of the ABM program or a signal that came as part of the ABM program. So, I mean, you can set up this infrastructure, plug it into your already winning motion, and just because you're discovering new signals or companies, you can have like a massive increase on your output. And I think I thought it was important to highlight that before we get into it, because what we're talking about is a little bit technical. It's the nitty gritty of it, but the nitty gritty is ultimately what results in a great outcome. So I'll pass the mic to Fivos to kind of go into how we approach it from a high level. Then we can go into it in a little more depth.
And it is technical, but I'm going to try to explain it in simple terms. And the best way I've found to explain complex things and just make them more understandable for everyone is with workflows and flowcharts. So I'll share my screen and show our approach and what we think that companies should be doing if they want to create an ABM program. So let me just share quickly.
Awesome. While you're pulling that up, I just want to just quickly build off of what Dan was saying. Like, I have this thing that I repeat quite often, and I say that a go-to-market motion will win when you have the right message going to the right person through the right medium. And a lot of people are obsessed with testing mediums. Oh, we're gonna try calls, we're gonna try emails, let's run ads, let's do in-person events, whatever it might be. And it's just so odd that I think of the message and then the who, the other two components there, like the who, the audience gets really overlooked. Like people will just grab 20,000 businesses from Apollo, dump it in and start blasting them. And like, as you were saying with the folks doing the calls, it's like, okay, well now 80% of your calls are going to go to people who like probably aren't even a fit. Like that is just wasted calories. And I think that's why a lot of motions fail. So we got it up. I can see it. Let's dive into this.
Exactly. So that's why the first step is to, and this really depends on the stage, right? Like if you're just starting out, like you obviously do not need to be doing this, but if you got plenty of data and you have a lot of customers, then that's the number one exercise that you should be doing, which is going inside your CRM, exporting close won and close lost. For close won, you want to see who spend the most with you. You want to also interview the account executives that were responsible for closing those deals. You also want to interview the CSMs that are managing those clients. And then for close loss, you want to see for what commonalities exist out there, what makes someone not really a fit. From there, the whole goal is to create an ICP model. And the way I like to explain the ICP model, I mean, you can see you have the TAM, which is your total addressable market. That's a bit more broad. And you want to start there, but that's not ultimately who you're going after. Neither is the serviceable addressable market. It's really the sum, right? Which is the ICP. That's how we like to call it. I think it's a bit more simple to understand. And it's based on 3 things. So it's based on firmographics, technographics, and account feed signals. And to get them, you need a combination of multiple databases, the classic ones, some custom scraping depending on your industry, qualifying them, and then from there, using AI to make sure that you only get those at the right fit and tearing them up. So for the sake of making this a bit more easy to understand, you can just see here the red section, what I have here. And it starts with the broad time map, as I said. So to do that, you can use a combination of databases as you see here. There's a couple of them here. Apollo AI Arc, Ocean is great for lookalikes, same with Discolike. SalesNav is a classic one, StoreLeads if you're in e-com. And then some other industries require scraping. And there you can use Apify, especially with Cloud Code. This has become one of our go-tos. Then you got more like Octoparse, Serper. You can just do some Python custom scripts as well. And then from there, the way that we approach it, and you can do this with other platforms like Freckle, or you can do this in Cloud Code, but for now, and what we've been doing for the last couple of years is Clay. I probably bet everyone knows Clay that is watching this event right now, but if someone doesn't know it, maybe we can just spend some time talking about it. You can just leave that in the comments. But the reason why we use Clay is basically for data enrichment and qualification. It's one of the best tools for visualization. So we just dump all the data inside there, and then we use GPT to basically tier them up. And it's another exercise that maybe we can go a bit more in depth in a second. But from there, the overall goal is to build the enriched target account list. And that is going to serve as a basis from then to actually go in and find signals, do signal stacking, awareness scoring, so you can see who's actually looking to buy your solution. From here, once we do this exercise, and I'm going to break down everything a bit in more depth, for the tier ones, that's where we suggest that you focus your ad spend, because those should be your priority accounts. And yeah, LinkedIn has been basically the main ad platform that the companies that we work with are using for that because of all the features that they got. From there, sourcing also contacts, and you want to find influencers, decision makers, and champions, and really mapping everything, because what we're going to be doing, and a lot of people are not doing this, is uploading everything to the CRM. And there is a reason why that we'll explain in a second. But only then you want to start tracking signals. And then for signals, there's been a lot of noise about them. The way that I always like to explain them is that there's first party, second party, and third party signals. First party are basically data that you own. Second party is that you own them, but you need an external platform to get them to you. And the third party is just publicly available data. For first party, you can see some of the best options out there. We've done all signals that you can imagine. These are basically what we found to be the most helpful ones, but there is always custom ones for every single company that we work with. There's custom ones that are not in this flowchart, but this should give you a good idea of what you can be tracking. So from here, basically, once we track everything, we want to create awareness scores, and this is inside of your CRM. And there's basically 5 main stages, which is identified, aware, interested, considering, selecting. Because you want to be tracking at any given time where companies at their funnel and what's their buying, basically the buying stage. The way we like to name that is awareness score. And there's a methodology that we follow that we'll also be breaking down in a bit. But in summary, identified is just your target account list. Selecting is the companies that booked the demo with you, and then aware, interested, and considering are basically custom. For every single case, it's different. We'll show you real examples what other companies are doing. Just wait for a second. From there, lead routing. So the way that we basically do this is with custom events. You can see here what's going on inside of HubSpot. We don't do properties. There's a reason for that, but I'm not going to go too much into the technicals. Then there's tasks that for every single rep will get. And then there's Slack notifications as well whenever a signal fires or whenever an awareness score changes. Only from there, so this was basically everything that I just described was about RevOps infrastructure. Only then demand generation is going to start. And that's how we view it. And that's how I think companies should do it. This will take extra time, yes, but you're setting up something that is going to be with you for years. And this is a constant exercise. You can always be adding more stuff and making the system better. But I believe that companies should be starting there, and only after they should be starting with demand gen. And then there is one-to-one, which is basically warm interest, personalized microsites, event invites, manual outreach, and then there's one-to-many. And some examples are automated emails, parallel dialing, retargeting ads, webinars, content, video outreach, and also connection requests. Push back everything to the CRM, and then that's how you achieve a go-to-market flywheel. From there, the final output, it's basically all the accounts mapped. They're tiered up. You have the stakeholders mapped, so you know every single contact that your reps should be going after. You're tracking signals and awareness scores so your reps can prioritize. So I'll just pause here because I know I said quite a lot. Maybe if Pete, you have any questions or anyone from the audience, and then we can break down everything a bit more in depth.
Yeah. So for audience, Dan just shared the link to this Miro board right in the chat. So you can grab that, bookmark it. This is really awesome. I think, well, I do have some questions. I just want to highlight one of the things you said though, Fivos, which is like, I know this takes a lot of time to set up, and it's like, look, folks, either you're going to spend a lot of time setting it up or you're going to spend a lot of time going after leads that are not a fit. So like, it's just, it's better to take the time to kind of dive into this and just have like an appropriately filtered, go-to-market motion. So, okay, a couple things I want to go through. So, so we have, so on the CRM side, that's where you're sort of like parsing out to look for your ICP model. From there, there's this broad TAM map, right? So we can pull from Apollo, Sales Nav. There's a bunch of others. I guess question on the database: have you, with today's database, right, April 7th, 2026, is there a database that you have found more reliable for broad TAM mapping than others? Or maybe let's also rope into that question, like one that's a little less expensive. Apollo, at least last time I signed a deal with Apollo, I think it was like 2 years. It was not cheap. It was somewhere in the 5 figures. I can't remember where. And Sales Nav is like $100 a month. So is there one that you found to be more reliable or just a better buy?
Yeah, I mean, Apollo is one thing to note is it's a very, you're always going to find holes in every database, but it is relative to Sales Nav a lot cleaner. Like you can, for example, they clean up the first names for you, they clean up the job titles. The problem with using Sales Nav is one, like you're not really allowed to take data out of it. But two, the data that you get out of it, you need to clean a lot if you're going to enter that into your CRM. And so technically, if you want to go closest to the source of truth and find specifically on the contact side of things, the most amount of contacts, I wouldn't say the company filters in Sales Nav are as good, but like for sure the best source of contacts would be Sales Nav directly. But you do have, limitations to that. And that's why companies like Apollo exists, because you're essentially paying for convenience and for that cleanup step, in my opinion. So I would say like good old, Apollo, Sales Nav, you obviously can't go wrong there. But I mean, we've been using some alternatives. So you can check out AI Arc. They are basically another database that can come in at a lower cost that has pretty good data. Ocean.io is one that we found to basically you do a lookalike search and find companies that maybe are a little bit harder to find through the traditional databases. Disco-like serves a similar purpose. But even Clay's data, I mean, the actual important thing here is we don't actually trust any data provider to give us an entire TAM. And so we're always using 2 to 3 and then, aggregating that into Clay. And so for me, if my team tells me that they only use one provider for a TAM map, no matter who that provider is, my confidence has lowered a bit. Whereas if you tell me that you're using 2 to 3 and you're qualifying and you're pulling broad TAM maps and then you're cutting it down, I almost don't care what database you're using, because if you're going through all that due diligence, the output is like way more likely to be high quality. So that's kind of how I think about it. Even if your database is giving you bad data, but you have such good QA steps there that you're removing bad data, well, you still will end up with a good output.
Okay, that's awesome. And then scraping, hugely important. I know over the, there are pockets of time where scraping is less reliable than others. It seems like Apify, APIFY, is has been pretty reliable. I've heard that from a couple folks, and just you guys saying it specifically gives me a lot of confidence in that. So I'll drop in the link to that as well. Now, I think what's interesting is when we look at this flow chart, and I'll share my screen. And sorry, it's only on half because I gotta download the thing. A couple of things. Like, I think people go from Apollo directly and they skip all of this and they upload it right to the CRM. Like, they're skipping a lot of this scoring and enriching. Also, like, one other thing to note too, enrichment comes before scoring because you need to have full data in order to accurately score it. And then on this scoring section, so you're using a combination of Clay and GPT. Do you have GPT running through Clay? Like, what is that? I'm curious what that looks like for folks, because I just think scoring's like great. Yes, enriching, but then like scoring and prioritizing is crazy important. So how do you have those tools working together, or do you?
Yeah, so we use it inside of Clay. So Clay, for those that don't know, they build Claygen, which is part of the reason why we can't really get rid of Clay and just go all in on Cloud Code. Also the visualization part, but they build Claygen, which allows you to build extremely easy custom web research agents. And then from there, you can choose your model. Like, typically we'll just use GPT and then we'll do Foro Mini because that saves money and it performs quite well. But when you want to do this at scale, when you're combining multiple databases and you end up with 70K rows of companies, when you run multiple prompts for those rows, then you might have a huge bill to pay. So that's why GPT Foro Mini is the way to go. But yeah, it's inside of Clay.
Okay, that's great. Then I see, well, there's a couple of questions in the chat. So one question here, my problem is that I need to increase the dial to connect my outbound team. Basically, I think what they're saying is like, I need to increase dial count. Whenever I hear that, and I'm curious your perspective, I always think about filtering, right? I'm like, okay, well, if you need more dials, it means most of the dials are probably not landing on the right person, and you need to like really get more intentful about who you are actually dialing out to. I don't think the solution is figuring out like hacking together a way to make 3,000 dials a day from like a couple of people.
I think when it comes to dials, we work with a lot of companies that actually have great success cold calling. I don't think the channel has died by any means, but I think the number one thing you can do is give your reps their lists. Like, I really don't believe any sales rep should be inundated with the task of like going on ZoomInfo or Apollo and building their own lists. So I'd say the number one thing you can do to increase their volume is just give them all the phone numbers and let them just work through their list. I'd say the other next two methods that we recommend clients, you can either get a tool that tells you how likely someone is to answer a call, something like a Titan X, very expensive, but it does work and it can tell you who's more likely to pick up. Or the approach that we go for a little bit more often, which is parallel dialing. You can get like a Nooks, spin up 3 numbers at the same time, and you can call 3 people at the same time. And you have that little sales room that helps you, prepare before you answer a call. So I would say, besides like doing the list building up front, you pretty much only have 2 methods. You either call more people or you call the people who are more likely to answer. But it's a pretty simple equation in that term.
Yeah, I like that. There's also, if you don't want to run the parallel dialing route, I've used like Phone Burner in the past, which basically just eliminates all the time between each dial, and it'll drop your voicemail for you. So you're not parallel where you're running like, you basically have it dialing out to like 3 numbers at a time, but it's not as efficient. Parallel dialing still wins in terms of like raw volume. But I know some people have some heartburn about parallel dialing, so I just wanted to throw that in. And then, okay. So there is a piece 2 on this board, and let me share. So right here, right? So we score our accounts, right? So we pull our data from our broad TAM map. We have our data enrichment and qualification. You guys have that running through Clay. Then we score our accounts. Okay, so once we score, now we have, a few different tiers, I guess, of quality of contact. So I'm curious, and maybe this is a ridiculous question because I'm sure it's different for every client that you guys work with and every instance, but we have this tier 1. I guess, what does that look like? Like, let's say, gosh, I know this is a ridiculously broad question with no context, but like, let's say I have 10,000 leads, right? like what percent of those 10,000 should be kind of falling into my tier one? Or like what would establish that something is tier one, I guess is what I'm trying to ask.
It's a good question.
My video randomly smushed, so I'm gonna let you take this one, Fivos.
Yeah,
for like
I got it.
5
Don't worry.
seconds.
Don't worry. I'm here for you. I'll share my screen. I'll show you how we define our own tiering. And like really the percentage you can't really know in advance because you want to build your model in concentric circles. And like I'll show you. I think this will just clear up a couple of questions, but a lot of people are really overcomplicating it, but at the end of the day, it really comes down to just like what kind of filters do you want to have again for firmographics, technographics, and then account feed signals. So here you have your dream account list. Like this is like completely different. Like this is where you handpick those accounts. Like maybe you want to go after, like Notion, maybe Ramp is one of the companies that you think that you're a perfect fit for. Like, there's a bunch. Like you always want to have those handpicked and not really relying upon a database or AI to have those in your list. And then from there, for tier one, like this is an example. So we're going after tech companies. You can't really filter out in databases for tech companies. Like every single industry tag inside of any database out there is pretty much not accurate. And the reason why is because they scrape LinkedIn, and then on LinkedIn, if I'm a SaaS in healthcare, I may put in my industry tag healthcare. So I'm not putting software development. So automatically, if you're gonna just do a search in a database for software development companies, then you're just not gonna find me. So that's why we're going more broad. From there, funding is extremely important for us. Like if they actually raise funds, if it's a venture-backed company, seed to Series B, from their location, headcount, and then tech, right? And then from there, tier two, it's very similar. What changes here is the location. So you can see we're keeping the rest pretty much the same. We're changing also tech. We can also do Salesforce here. For us, tier one is ideally HubSpot because this is just where we think we're better at, but Salesforce is not a problem either. Then tier three, it's any B2B company. So services included here as well. Funding, it could be anything. And then here you can see locations. And then we do have some extra criteria here because since we're aligning services, typically we work with only SaaS. They have to be more than 30 employees. If it's a tech company, then more than 10 employees or raised at least $1 million in funding. And if none of these criteria, like if they don't fit in any of these buckets, then it means it's just a disqualified company. So I'm not going to be reaching out to them. And then if they book a meeting with me, then I know if I'm doing ICP pipeline progression or if I'm just, getting leads that are not qualified, and then I'm going to have my reps just waste their time talking to them.
Yeah, I completely agree. I also like that this dream account list, like, so the number is a little bit arbitrary, but like we call it the dream 100. Like, so if you're really early on or you're really trying to start building this motion, this idea of like really hand picking 100, 150, 200 accounts, and actually going through and hand picking and not just trying to find the people who you think you can get the most money out of, but like the ones who you think are a dead on fit for your solution. And then like extrapolating from there, I think it is a exercise that a lot of folks talk about and very few actually do. I know you guys are obviously doing it and doing it for your clients, but this idea of like just getting really manual with it in the beginning before you go automated. And I think in the world of Clay and ChatGPT, Claude, all these other automation tools, I think it's like the temptation to just immediately start automating is there, but it does not, it's probably not going to lead to quality right off the bat. And it's probably going to be a bigger mess to try to clean up if you're trying to, start with 10,000 accounts as opposed to 150. So I like that you had that on there. That's awesome. Now I'm curious. So a lot of folks, and I see some questions in the chat about signal tracking. For you guys, when you look at signals, right? I know that's further down on your flow chart that you shared. But are there, in today's world, are there like certain signals that you're finding are more reliable? I'm sure this is case by case as well, but whether that's website visits versus job changes, funding rounds, seeing job boards and who's hiring for what, like, are there certain signals that you found to be reliable and you use them on almost every account?
Yeah. So two important pitfalls before we move into signals that I want to talk about for account scoring. Two things that I see so many companies make the mistake of. Number one is complex point scoring systems. Now, if you really know your ICP and you're really pedantic about this, you can manage a point scoring system. I actually come from a biology background. I love complicated, algorithms and stuff like this. So I wanted to bring that into GTM. And after falling on my face so many times, basically trying to do complicated scoring methodologies, I actually realized exactly what Fivos said: the simpler, the better. You want to design it in concentric circles. So one recommendation I have is to not overcomplicate it. Keep it pretty simple. Even if the difference between your tier 2 and tier 1 is like your tier 1, you didn't find a competitive signal, like you didn't find that they're using, I don't know, let's take it for our B2B. Maybe to be a tier 1 account, it's the same firmographics, but the only difference is they don't have a vector or warmly, whatever it might be. Whereas a tier 1 account, a tier 2 account might. Like, that's fine as long as it's simple. Your reps need to see tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 and actually associate some meaning to that. So the more complexity you add to how you score this out, like the less intuitive your rep is going to find the scoring to actually like know what a tier 1 actually looks like. The second issue I see is mixing up intent and account fit. So we say account fit signals. An account fit signal, for example, I built this ABM program out for one of the biggest tools for cold calling, for calling in general. A huge signal for them was if they have a phone number on their website. That is the perfect example of an account fit signal. It's still a signal, it's custom research, but it's not going to change month to month. A lot of people start confusing when they build out their scoring methodologies, like website visits. Like, no, that's a separate thing in our books. There's account fit, how likely are from a company is from a firmographic perspective, they are to be able to work with you. Intent is something totally different. It has to do with signals, and that's time-based stuff that's changing month to month that wouldn't make sense to do in an account fit score. Like, your account fit score should be valid for as long as possible. I heard someone say, how long should we refresh it? We typically recommend our clients to refresh their CRM data, at least the important data points, once a year. But like, you don't want within that year a company moving from like tier 2 to tier 1 to tier 3 just because you had some sort of time-based signal in terms of how you're scoring it. You want your account scoring to be very more or less static in time, or like not based on data points that can change over time. And then you have awareness scoring and signal tracking, which is all the exciting signals that pop up in your market that you're going to want to act on as soon as they come up. So important distinguishment there.
I am very glad you said that. I think that is a big distraction. Sometimes the time-based stuff, and it can be fleeting, right? Like, let's say you're going off of job boards. Most people are not refreshing once a year. Let's be honest. They're refreshing every few years, or if at all. Let's say you're doing once a year. As you said, those are fleeting. And some of the ones like website visit, job postings, role changes, those are very they have a very small pocket of time in which they're relevant. So I'll give you an example of one that I experienced in the past. So I was at a company called Ship Science, still around. Ship Science helps e-commerce businesses save money on shipping. So pretty clear mission there. And if your TAM is, or your audience is e-commerce businesses, you go to Apollo or one of these other databases to try to pull e-commerce businesses, like, they're not cleanly defined within an industry or something. They're usually bucketed under retail. Sometimes they'll be bucketed under the type of product that they sell. So let's say you're selling computer parts online. Well, you might be thrown into the IT bucket of ZoomInfo or Apollo. And so for us, we're like, okay, well, we need to figure out who is shipping stuff, and then we can kind of assess volume from there. But, we're looking for folks with about $1 million or so in shipping volume. So the two things that we used, and we scraped to find these, but one, it was, do they have a return policy on their website? If you have a return policy, it means you're shipping stuff out that people want to return. pretty, easy signal. And then the second one was just website traffic, which yes, does fluctuate year to year. I think on average it was going up, at least with the businesses we were looking at, but it's just, I want to point that out because your note, like, I think we all think of signals as like job changes, website visits, like all of these very timely signals, but it is so much more than that. And I encourage people to try to find proxy metrics or something to try to further qualify their audience. There's so much info out there. For us, we couldn't, just pull a list of FedEx and UPS shippers, certainly not by volume. So we did have to come up with these proxy metrics, but like this scraping and stuff that you can do these days makes all of that like very possible and honestly not that big of a lift. So anyway, I wanted to add that in.
I mean, what you said is exactly why I mentioned the tools have changed ABM so much. I mean, imagine doing, I don't know if when you were working at that company that AI was around, but like doing that without AI would be an actual engineering lift. You'd need to build some sort of like workflow and script. Now with AI, you can actually get to that level of qualification quite easily just by prompting. And so like the possibilities have opened up in terms of how targeted you could be in your GTM that previously would require you to like procure a ton of data and then build some custom solution to try and qualify the companies on that list. So I think like that example is a perfect reason why ABM has had a comeback, had a resurgence, because that task that you mentioned before would be impossible pre-AI and is like pretty easy post-AI.
Yeah, and it was so when we did this exercise, most of my time there was pre-AI, pre-ChatGPT, which I always pin at like, October of 2022 ish of like when that really took over the world. Yeah, we had an engineer build a scraper and like it was it's not as reliable as like something built by Anthropic or OpenAI or one of these, massive companies. So yeah, it is just easier. And honestly, even all the tools out there that are built on top of OpenAI or a Claude just make that possible. So I really encourage people to think more deeply about that scoring mechanism and those signals, because chances are there's great signals out there for you that maybe you haven't thought about, or you've thought about but haven't realized how accessible that those signals are. Just feed them into your CRM. You can score it from there. So there's a lot you can do. Now, I'm curious. So I know you're using GPT, you're using Clay. You're doing a lot of like account research that's automated, as you just talked about. So, before, like I remember late 2010s hiring researchers to supplement our SDR team because the research was so, it was just time consuming and it would cause our reps to do a lot of context switching. So we actually had these researchers going through and qualifying accounts. Now you don't really need researchers, right? We have AI agents that can do our research. So what is like, how do you think about, I guess, I hate to use the word prompt, but like, is there like a research prompt or workflow or something that you run through GPT, Clay, that you could show folks kind of a little bit more under the hood of how you are doing some of those qualifying, activities for, SDRs or just, I guess, your lead list in general?
Yeah, maybe Dana, maybe you find something that you can show that doesn't have client data. But yeah, I think if we show you an actual example of something that we've done that's gonna help answer your question. But the way that we like to think about it is what are those data points that you'd manually want and you'd find out and how. So for example, what Dan said, if we want to look at the footer of each site and find if they have a phone number, if that's what you're doing, then chances are that we can completely automate that. The idea is that we really need to first define how is that done manually, because if we don't, then how are we going to do any automation on it? And the way we like to structure this, I'll just share my screen again. You can see here. So you can see we have all the data points and the objects on the right side. So you can see for contacts, do we want the emails, first name, last name, phone number, and so on. And then for company, these, and then you just write down how are you actually going to find them. So for example, for the industry. I'm not going to be relying on a database because they're going to get it wrong. I'm going to use a Claygen prompt, and then for the others, you can see what I'm doing, and then these are just 26 data points. We go well about beyond that, and for the customers, it does take a lot of time to do a lot of prompt engineering. I think that's extremely undervalued. It does take a lot of time to get these prompts to work at scale, especially when you want to do this across, again, 50K, 60K companies. So maybe Dan has a precise example. I'm not sure if you had enough time to find something that we can show.
Yeah, I mean, look, we can't show our client table, so I'm just going to show a demo. I did this for a sales call not too long ago, so it's just something that I found, but nothing related to a client here.
Well, I'll let you pull that up. I also, in a minute too, I want to do a little kind of freestyle on just your thoughts on the state of tools. I've started getting into Claude Code and Cowork and really doing a lot of stuff. So we'll get into that at the end here. But
yeah. Well, Dan has some great thoughts because he's been really geeking out on Claude Code. He spent a lot of hours. We did a huge session with our team and trained everyone on it. And I'll say that our team is now spending around 200 hours in total every single week on Claude Code if you combine all 20 people together. So yeah, we're heavy users. We do think that Claude Code is game changing, but we also huge Clay fans, and we use it for everything that we do. Okay. And this is the example that Dan was talking about. So where do you?
I mean, this is a bit random, but it's also just an example to show like what we say when we mention enriching a clay table. So if you scroll all the way to the left, as you can imagine, when you're doing these temp apps, you're essentially your starting point is typically like name and domain, especially if you're scraping. So the first step is to like fill in gaps of your knowledge. In this case, we were interested in the GitHub activities of these companies because this was selling a development tool. And so the first thing we had to do was find their GitHub organization. Then we started finding user details. This was, let's say, designed to be an enrichment on exactly what they're doing on GitHub. As you can see, we're layering on different data inputs. And using that sheet that Fivos showed before, we're mapping out like what are all the data points that we actually care about. So in this case, it was how many public repos they have. Now that's a property on the company level on the CRM that we're going to send so that any rep, without leaving HubSpot or Salesforce, can just see, for example, how many public repos a company has, can see how many stargazers they have, the main languages they're using. So this was an example for a dev tool that this was useful for them, but this is just a real use case of how you might want to go really deep into the accounts that you're reaching out to and really understand what the world is like. And then there's many different data sources for that. But for this specific client, we actually ended up making the sale, and we're actually doing this implementation. They have 40 plus data points on a company's development stack and what they're doing on GitHub, all uploaded as properties in the CRM, so that a rep just has to basically look at all the properties and they get the full account picture, much deeper than they would actually be able to get just by researching LinkedIn or just by looking at like their Zoom info record. This is what we mean. We take that base record of like domain, maybe you have the headcount from your other source, and we're really layering on deep research on top of that, uploading that to the CRM as properties, and then we get into the time-based signal stuff next. But that's kind of what we talk about when we talk about like account enrichment, is like we're going really deep. What are all the different data points? For our B2B, I imagine it's like probably how much organic website traffic they have. Like you're going to want all of this stored as properties on your CRM.
And Pete, like this is just like to make it clear, it's done, but this is all done by one person at scale. Before, you said that you were hiring researchers to do this. So imagine how more accessible everything became to even smaller companies.
This is like so insane. Okay, so I haven't led a sales team. I sort of moved over to like marketing growth stuff in 2020, I guess early 23. And this like blows my mind because I just know all the manual work required before. And I think to folks who are in the audience right now, like I know there's a lot of like some of these tools are pretty intimidating, whether it's Claude Code or Cowork or Clay. And I would just recommend people who are intimidated by sort of the complexity of some of these systems to just jump in, because once you start to understand how the system works, which honestly doesn't take all that long. Like if you're completely new to Clay and you jumped in and spent a full afternoon on it, you would be amazed at how far along you are in your understanding after just a few hours. And then the leverage you get out of that. I mean, that is doing what you just showed does so much more work than my team of researchers used to do, just because it's like the Terminator. It can just plow through and do these things overnight, which is really amazing. I'm like stunned by Clay and its research sort of capabilities. So I would say for folks who are intimidated, just jump in, just try it out for a month. Just dip your toes into the water and really commit to learning. And I think you'll be pretty amazed at how far you get. I would recommend, if you're going to dive into Clay, pull up ChatGPT side by side, ask it questions, and just kind of start ripping through what you want to do. Describe what you want to do, describe what your problems are, have it ask you questions. And it's like having your own Clay assistant. I think the pitfall a lot of people fall into is they'll start watching YouTube videos, which is great. I don't mean to I mean, look, we're doing a video right here about this stuff. But if you really want to start learning, just jump into it, because chances are you're going to be watching someone build a workflow that on YouTube that isn't going to be the workflow you're building. It'll be helpful. It'll certainly allow you to understand sort of the power and the capabilities, but yeah, I mean, this is the same thing with Claude. Like the amount of people I talk to about Claude, there's the folks who have used it. So Dan, I'm sure you've been up later than you thought you would at night, pounding away at inquiries, just nudging it along. Man, I have been on the same, I can swipe between desktops on my left screen. One of them is just Claude, and I am just ripping. I mean, I don't do it during the show, but I will like usually just be nudging it along all day. So yeah, I'm curious kind of with new tools, I'm just kind of curious from your perspective, what obviously Clay, incredibly powerful, but I'm curious what you guys have used, either whether it's the Clay agents or Claude Cowork or Code. What have you found to be the coolest project or use case that you've worked on, or maybe you're still building with those things, just to give folks some sort of last minute inspiration to kind of the power behind some of these things? Because I think everybody who hops in is completely wowed and blown away, as I was. And then it'll cause you a few weeks of sleepless nights for sure, in a good way. But yeah,
I'll let Dan take it. In the meanwhile, Dan actually created a guide that will get you from 0 to 1 for Claude Code. So I'll just share that to the chat, and Dan, I think you're gonna answer this way better than me.
Yeah. Stumbled into Clay. As I said, I was a full cycle AE, doing all this stuff manually, like you mentioned, and it blew my mind. I was like, I know that this is going to be huge. I was a very early Clay user, and I was right. I haven't had that feeling for any tool. Like, I try out many tools. I like many tools. The one tool I really thought was going to change the game was Clay. I still think it's a huge, massive tool. It's a core part of our stack. But the next time I had that feeling was with Claude Code, and I haven't had that feeling with any other tech since. I think in terms of like people thinking about which tool to use for their GTM, I would say if you want a repeatable workflow that has observability, that you can really understand exactly what it did to every single, for example, record that went through the workflow, and you want it to be highly repeatable, you want to look back to it, you want to monitor it, Clay is going to be for you. For things that need to happen on an ongoing basis that you need to plan for in the future. But if you want the easiest way to get a hyper intelligent AI working through a large amount of data, Claude Code might be actually a better fit for you, depending on how technical you are and how much time you want to invest setting it up. We're not a lead gen agency, but lots of lead gen agencies who were previously using Clay are now doing giant scale enrichments all on Claude Code. For us, because we deliver a workflow as our deliverable, that doesn't make as much sense, but we're fully into Claude Code as a company. I think the most interesting thing you can do as a company is to take your entire context graph and distill that into markdown files that are understandable by AI. So ideally you can upload them to GitHub, and that makes it very easy for your team to access them and use them in their Claude Code. The first thing you want to do is set up that context graph. Then you want to hook up all your tools, all the tools via MCP or connector or CLI. And then the real powerful unlock is then once it has all the context, it has all the tools. Now you can start to build either automations or skills, like one-time workflows that basically know exactly your business, can now log into your tools. And so essentially, we took all of our SOPs that were written in Notion and we turned them into skills that are actually doing the thing. So we went from like Notion docs explaining people how to do the thing to skills that can do the thing, oftentimes to like a 70% degree that a human could do it at the best capacity. But you can get the first 70% done now automatically through a pre-codified skill that your team doesn't even need to like read a document. You just give it to them. And that is like such a huge operational unlock you can't even fathom unless you've actually jumped into Claude Code as you have, Pete. So I don't think those tools are overlapping as much as some people think. There's definitely use cases where you could rip and replace Clay with Claude Code, but definitely those are the two game-changing tools I think in the market right now for GTM.
I completely agree. I think too, like, and we got 2 minutes left, so I'll get somewhat philosophical, but like, there's this narrative out there, AI is going to take all of our jobs. Once you start using these tools, like you get into code, you get into co-work, you realize how much like you still need to be guiding it. And especially like your expertise on whatever the subject is. And all of the tasks that I'm wowed at from a go-to-market perspective, and I think you are too, as a former AE. I was an AE in the past too, for a while. All the stuff that it's automating is definitely stuff I never wanted to do in the first place. It's like really mindless stuff. Look, the folks that were on our research team years ago are definitely now doing better. They have way better, more interesting, more inspiring jobs. And I think this is just exposing more about how manual and inefficient a lot of systems were. And this is just making us so much more productive, so much more intelligent. So guys, go grab that guide. I just, Fivos dropped it into the chat here. I also dropped in Dan and Fivos's LinkedIn profiles. I dropped in the website workflows.io. Pull all 4 of those up in your tabs as we're about to end the show. But guys, this was amazing. I love the thought. Of course, you're running an ABM business, but like just the thought you're putting into really like targeting the right people, the enrichment, the filtration, the scoring, and then that loop at the bottom. You had the flywheel, and that's really what it is. It's like, how do we establish our flywheel so we're not just doing these one-off, kind of campaigns on continuums that we then basically have to start over. So I love your approach. This was a fantastic show. Thank you so much for joining. Guys, follow Dan, follow Fivos on LinkedIn. They also post fantastic content. Like, I think you guys are the best ABM creators on LinkedIn today. So guys, give them a follow for sure. Next week, we have Will McTeague. He is a LinkedIn powerhouse. All his content's about growing on LinkedIn. He always has his finger on the pulse of what is working on LinkedIn right now. So join us next week. I'm going to share the guide one more time because someone just asked in the chat right here.
Oh, oops. I accidentally sent the wrong thing. I'm going to delete. All right. Yeah, you sent it. All right. It's the one that Pete sent.
Okay. Everyone open that up before we end this call. You got like 1 minute. And Dan, Fivos, thank you for joining. Especially thanks for joining late in Barcelona. You guys rock, and would love to have you back in the future as these things get even crazier. So, yeah, thanks so much.
Cool. Thanks so much, Pete.
Hey, everybody, have a great day. We'll see you next week. Bye.
Thanks, everyone, for stopping by.
Bye-bye.
Bye.